Welcome to Revenge with Roman, where betrayal, heartbreak, and shocking revelations collide. Each story we bring you is packed with raw emotions, deep suspense, and the kind of twists that keep you on the edge of your seat. High voltage in today's story. The hidden life of my ex. The shocking truth revealed. Imagine loving someone so deeply, believing every word, every promise, every shared moment, only to discover that everything was built on lies. What would you do if the person you trusted most had a past darker than you ever imagined? A secret life carefully hidden, waiting to unravel at the worst possible moment. This is not just a tale of love and betrayal. It's a journey through deceit, heartbreak, and the sweet sting of revenge. Ethan had always trusted Clara. From the very beginning of their marriage, he believed her words carried no shadows, no hidden meanings, no deception. She had a way of smiling that disarmed suspicion, of brushing away doubt with warmth, so convincing it felt foolish to question her. Yet lately, something in the air between them had shifted, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable, but undeniable once it took root in his mind. It started with the little things, like the way she avoided certain conversations, how she deflected questions about her past with vague stories, how she would slip away into another room when her phone rang late at night. Ethan told himself not to be paranoid, that after years together he should know her better than anyone, but the unease gnawed at him like a splinter buried too deep beneath the skin to ignore. One evening, while Claire was out with friends, Ethan found himself standing in their living room staring at the framed photographs lying neatly on the mantel. He looked at her smile in every picture, that same carefully constructed warmth, and wondered why it suddenly felt rehearsed. His eyes caught the wedding photo they had taken years ago, and instead of joy, it filled him with a strange hollowness. A thought echoed in his mind, one that he didn't want to admit even to himself. What if he didn't really know her at all? The first inconsistency he noticed was in one of her stories. Clara had told him early on that she grew up in a small town on the coast, a quiet place where she said she felt trapped until she left for college. She'd painted vivid images of beaches, sea winds, and boardwalks lined with shops where she claimed to have worked part-time as a teenager. But recently, in a casual conversation, she had mentioned a memory from her childhood about snowy winters and ice fishing with her father. Ethan froze when he heard it. Snow? Ice fishing? None of it aligned with the coastal upbringing she had always described. When he asked her about it, she laughed it off quickly, saying she must have been thinking about a movie. The explanation didn't sit right with him, but he forced himself to let it go. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next weeks, Ethan began noticing more cracks. A friend of hers once asked if she had ever gone back to her old hometown, and Clara's reaction was too sharp, almost panicked. She laughed nervously and brushed it aside, but Ethan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Why would she avoid answering something so harmless unless she had something to hide? He remembered the way her eyes had darted away, how her hands had fidgeted as though she was trying to keep her story from unraveling. Ethan's suspicions deepened one night, when Clara left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she stepped out to take a phone call. He never liked the idea of snooping, but something inside him compelled him to look. The screen displayed an email draft, unfinished, unsent, but it wasn't the message itself that shook him. It was the email address from line. It wasn't a regular email, the one she always used. This one bore a completely different name, one he'd never heard before, and the message contained vague references to keeping things quiet and not letting Ethan know. His chest tightened, and a wave of nausea hit him. He quickly closed the laptop before she returned, his mind racing with questions. The following day, Ethan tried to confront her gently, masking his suspicion with casual curiosity. "Hey, do you have another email? I think I saw something strange on your laptop." Clara froze mid-step, her eyes flicking to his before she forced a laugh. "No, of course not. You must have imagined it." The answer was too quick, too defensive, and Ethan knew she was lying. His heart sank as he realized the woman he shared his life with might not be who she claimed to be. Sleepless nights followed. Ethan would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind looping through every moment they had shared. He replayed their conversations, searching for details that didn't quite fit, for inconsistencies he had overlooked. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, a web of half-truths and evasions. The more he pieced it together, the more it became clear that Clara's past was not just blurry. It had been deliberately blurred, carefully painted over with lies. He tried to push away the dread by convincing himself it was just stress, just paranoia. But then came the night when Clara claimed she was meeting an old college friend for dinner. Hours passed. Midnight came and went, and she still wasn't home. Ethan sat in the dimly lit living room, staring at the clock, his jaw tight. When she finally walked through the door, her hair slightly disheveled, her eyes avoiding his, she muttered an excuse about the restaurant running late. But he smelled faint traces of cologne on her clothes, cologne that wasn't his. That was the moment Ethan knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. He felt as though he had been living with a stranger, a ghost wrapped in a familiar body. Every smile, every laugh, every kiss now seemed tainted by the possibility that it had all been part of performance. And beneath that performance, something darker, something carefully concealed, waited to be uncovered. Clara's past wasn't just a mystery. It was a puzzle with missing pieces, and Ethan realized he had only begun to see the edges of it. Clara's late-night calls had started as nothing more than a background noise in Ethan's mind, the kind of small detail he dismissed at first. He told himself everyone had friends they caught up with, old colleagues they spoke to, or family members who called at odd hours. But soon those calls became too frequent, too carefully hidden. Every time the phone rang past midnight, Clara would rise abruptly, her tone sharp yet hushed, and step into another room. The sound of her voice, muffled behind a closed door, gnawed at Ethan's nerves. Sometimes she would return 20 minutes later with a smile too wide, as if pasted on her face, and she'd change the subject before he could even ask who it was. It wasn't just the phone calls. Her behavior during the day began to shift as well. Clara grew more protective of her phone, carrying it with her from room to room, never letting it out of sight. If Ethan so much as glanced in its direction, she would pull it closer to her chest, muttering something about work stuff or private messages. That level of secrecy was new, and it left Ethan with a hollow ache in his stomach. He began to notice that she deleted her call logs, sometimes entire message threads, as though she feared leaving behind even the smallest trace of her conversations. One night, Ethan pretended to be asleep when a familiar vibration of her phone broke the silence. He watched from the corner of his eye as Clara slipped out of bed, her movements careful and deliberate, her bare feet padding softly against the floor. She didn't just answer the call in another room. She went outside, into the cool darkness of the night. Through the window, Ethan could see her silhouette pacing back and forth in the yard, her body tense, her hands gesturing as though the words she spoke demanded secrecy. The tone of her voice was different, urgent, tinged with a kind of familiarity he couldn't place. When she returned nearly half an hour later, she slid under the sheets quietly, thinking he was asleep, but Ethan kept his breathing steady, his eyes closed, while his mind spiraled with questions. The secrecy soon became impossible to ignore. Clara would receive text messages late in the evening, her phone lighting up with names or numbers she quickly hid. Sometimes she would step outside claiming she needed fresh air, but Ethan noticed she was always clutching her phone tightly, her eyes fixed on the glowing screen. The more he tried to dismiss his doubts, the heavier they pressed against him. He wanted to believe her, to trust her like he always had, but her evasive behavior made it impossible. One afternoon, Ethan decided to test her. Casually, he asked, "Who keeps calling you so late these days? Is everything okay?" For the briefest second, Clara's expression faltered. Her lips parted as if she were caught off guard, her eyes flickering with something that looked dangerously close to fear. But then she recovered, letting out a laugh that rang hollow in his ears. "Oh, it's just an old friend from college. She's going through a rough time, you know how it is." Her explanation was quick, too smooth, rehearsed. Ethan nodded, forcing a smile, but his gut twisted with unease. Over time, Clara's secretive behavior began to feel like a wall between them. Ethan caught her whispering into the phone when she thought he was out of earshot. Her words clipped, urgent. Once, when he entered the room unexpectedly, she jumped and ended the call so abruptly it left no doubt in his mind that she didn't want him to hear. Her eyes darted to his face, searching for any sign of suspicion, and then she forced another of those smiles that no longer reached her eyes. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was dread. The late-night calls weren't random. They weren't harmless. And as the days went on, Ethan realized that whatever Clara was hiding, it was growing bigger, darker, and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Ethan couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. So one quiet Sunday afternoon, while Clara was out running errands, he decided to look around the house with a sharper eye. He wasn't proud of it. Searching through your partner's belongings was something he never imagined himself doing, but the secrecy, the late-night calls, the hollow excuses, they all pushed him to a point where trust no longer felt safe. He told himself he wasn't snooping, he was protecting himself. At least, that's how he justified it, as his hands moved through drawers and shelves he had never bothered to open before. At first, he found nothing unusual. Old bills, receipts, stacks of papers that seemed perfectly normal. But tucked inside a small box at the back of the closet, beneath a pile of scarves, Ethan discovered a folder sealed with a rubber band. His chest tightened as he pulled it out, his pulse quickening. The folder was heavier than he expected, filled with papers and documents. When he loosened the band and spread the contents across the bed, what he saw made his stomach drop. There were identification cards, 2 of them with Clara's picture but different names. One was the Clara he knew, with her familiar smile, her birth date, and the details she had shared with him years ago. The other ID, however, told a different story. A new name, a different city, even a different date of birth. Ethan stared at it in disbelief, his mind refusing to piece the 2 versions of the same woman together. Beneath the IDs, there were other papers too, old utility bills addressed to another name, envelopes with postmarks from places Clara had never once mentioned, and even a lease agreement signed with that unfamiliar identity. His hands trembled as he flipped through each document. Everything pointed to one chilling conclusion. Clara had lived an entirely separate life before him, a life she had deliberately hidden. The beach town childhood, the stories of working summer jobs, the so-called simple upbringing. It was all beginning to feel like a carefully crafted script. He thought back to the inconsistencies in her stories, the way she sometimes paused before answering questions about her past, and now it all made sense. She hadn't been forgetting details. She had been lying, weaving together fragments of 2 lives and hoping he wouldn't notice the seams. The strangest piece of all was an old photograph folded neatly at the bottom of the folder. Ethan opened it with shaking hands. It was Clara, younger, standing next to a man he had never seen before. She looked different, not just physically, but in the way her smile carried a reckless confidence, nothing like the warm but guarded woman he knew now. On the back of the photograph, scribbled in faded ink, was a note, "Always us, no matter what." The word struck him like a blade. Who was this man? And why had she hidden every trace of him? Ethan's mind raced with questions. Did Clara leave this other life behind willingly, or was she running from something? Why had she created an entirely new identity, and why had she never mentioned any of it to him? His heart pounded as a sickening thought formed. What if she wasn't who he thought she was at all? The sound of the front door opening jolted him back to reality. Clara was home. Panicked, Ethan shoved the documents back into the folder, wrapped the rubber band around it, and returned it to the closet, burying it beneath the scarves exactly as he had found it. He sat on the bed, trying to steady his breathing, his chest aching as he forced himself to appear calm. Moments later, Clara entered the room, her eyes sweeping over him as if searching for something. For a heartbeat, Ethan wondered if she could sense what he had just done, if she could see the knowledge he now carried burning behind his eyes. She smiled her usual practiced ease and asked about his day. Ethan responded with words that felt foreign in his mouth, his mind still echoing with the image of her face on 2 different IDs, and that haunting photograph that seemed to belong to a stranger wearing Clara's skin. Ethan didn't have to wait long before Clara's carefully guarded past began to slip through the cracks in ways she couldn't control. It happened in small, almost unnoticeable moments. At dinners, at casual get-togethers, in conversations where people let their guard down. One evening, they attended a party at a mutual friend's house. Drinks flowed, laughter echoed through the rooms, and for a while, Ethan let himself relax. But then a woman he didn't know approached Clara, her face lighting up in recognition. "Clara? Or should I say Anna?" she said. half laughing, half curious. Ethan froze. He looked at Clara, waiting for her to explain, but her reaction was a second too slow. A flicker of panic flashed across her face before she forced a smile and brushed it off as a joke. She laughed louder than necessary, waved her hand, and quickly steered the conversation away. But Ethan had seen it. The fear in her eyes, the way her body stiffened, the sudden urgency in her voice. That single slip planted a weight in his chest heavier than any suspicion he'd carried before. Later, when he casually asked who that woman was, Clara shrugged. Just some drunk stranger. Probably mistook me for someone else. She said it without meeting his gaze. Her tone clipped. Ethan nodded, but inside his unease deepened. It was too precise, too personal to be a mistake. The following week, another thread unraveled. They were out for lunch with an old couple Clara claimed were family friends. The conversation flowed easily until the woman, sipping her tea, leaned across the table and asked Clara if she'd ever heard from Michael again. Clara froze, her fork hovering midair, her knuckles whitening around it. "No," she said quickly, "and I don't want to." The woman's brows furrowed in confusion. Then she glanced at Ethan as though realizing she had stepped into forbidden territory. The rest of the meal passed in forced cheer, Clara dominating the conversation with stories that felt overly rehearsed. But Ethan caught every twitch in her jaw, every nervous glance. That name, Michael, lodged itself in his mind, sharp and unanswered. The unsettling revelations didn't stop there. One evening, Clara's childhood friend Lisa visited unannounced. Ethan had never met her before, but she seemed genuinely happy to reconnect. Over coffee, Lisa began reminiscing about the wild days of their youth. "Remember that summer when you disappeared for weeks and everyone thought you ran off with him?" she said with a chuckle. Clara's face drained to color, her eyes narrowing as if silently begging Lisa to stop. Ethan sat frozen, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Disappeared? Ran off? Who was him? Clara quickly interrupted, changing the subject with practiced ease, but her forced laugh rang hollow. That night, Ethan replayed the conversation over and over in his mind. He could feel the edges of a truth trying to surface, each story from Clara's past poking holes in the carefully woven fabric of lies she had wrapped around him. The strange slip-ups, the names from nowhere, the nervous reactions together, they painted a picture of a life Clara was desperate to bury, a life that others seemed to know, even if they only mentioned it by accident. The next time it happened, there was no mistaking the fear in her eyes. They were at the grocery store, when a man in his 50s suddenly stopped his cart in front of them. His eyes widened in recognition, and he muttered her name, not Clara, but that other name, the name on the second ID. Clara froze, her face pale as snow, and for a heartbeat she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "You've got the wrong person," she snapped, pulling Ethan by the arm and walking away so fast he nearly stumbled. Her grip on his wrist was iron, her breathing sharp and uneven. That was the moment Ethan knew the truth wasn't just lurking beneath the surface. It was clawing its way out, no matter how tightly Clara tried to keep it hidden. Ethan couldn't shake the memory of the man in the grocery store, the way he had spoken Clara's other name as if it belonged to her more than the one she used now. That night, while Clara pretended to read on the couch, Ethan sat across from her, watching her carefully, every twitch of her lips, every subtle movement of her hands. She seemed restless, her eyes flicking to her phone again and again, waiting for something or someone. When the phone finally buzzed, she snatched it up with lightning speed and stepped outside, muttering that she needed air. Ethan's heart hammered as he counted the seconds she was gone. 15 minutes later, she returned, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly, though she tried to mask it with a smile. The next day, his questions were answered in a way he hadn't expected. A knock at the door came late in the evening, sharp and urgent. Ethan opened it to find a man standing there, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that carried a weight of knowing. He looked at Ethan with a mix of pity and warning, as though he already understood the storm Ethan was living in. "You're Ethan, right?" the man asked, his voice low but firm. Ethan nodded, suspicion tightening his chest. "I need to talk to you." The man continued, glancing past Ethan as if expecting Clara to appear at any second. It's about Clara. Or, the woman you think is Clara. The word sent a cold shiver down Ethan's spine. He stepped aside reluctantly, letting the stranger into the living room. Clara wasn't home yet, and for that he was grateful. The man didn't make small talk. He went straight to the point. You don't know who she really is. She's been lying to you, hiding things from you, things that could destroy everything if you're not careful. Ethan's mouth went dry. Who are you? He demanded. My name's Daniel, the man replied, his jaw tightening. And I used to know her, back when she went by another name, before she disappeared. Ethan's stomach dropped. He thought of the second ID, the photograph with the unknown man, the slip-ups at parties, and now here was someone standing in his living room, confirming the very fears that had been clawing at his mind. Daniel's eyes were sharp, unwavering. She's not the person you think she is. There are things about her past, people, debts, choices, that she's been running from. If you stay blind to it, it'll drag you down with her. Ethan wanted to demand answers, to force Daniel to explain everything in detail, but his voice caught in his throat. The weight of the man's warning pressed down on him like a stone. Daniel left as suddenly as he had arrived, his final words echoing in the silence. Be careful. You're in deeper than you realize. When Clara returned home later that night, Ethan studied her face as she walked through the door, her smile faltering when she saw him sitting in the darkened living room. He didn't ask where she had been. He didn't tell her about Daniel's visit. But something inside him shifted. The doubt that had once been just suspicion was now a certainty. He was living with someone whose past was not only hidden but dangerous, and sooner or later, the truth would come crashing into their lives with consequences he could no longer escape. Daniel's warning replayed in Ethan's mind like a broken record, each word digging deeper into his thoughts until sleep became impossible. He started noticing details he had brushed off before. Receipts Clara left in her purse from places she claimed she never visited, sudden withdrawals from their joint account, and the way she always seemed anxious when the topic of money came up. At first, Ethan assumed it was just normal financial stress, but as he began piecing everything together, the picture became far darker. One morning, while Clara showered, Ethan opened her desk drawer in the home office. She kept it locked most of the time, but this time she had forgotten. Inside, he found a small notebook, the kind people use for jotting down reminders. But instead of shopping lists or casual notes, it contained numbers, account numbers, transaction dates, and amounts large enough to make Ethan's stomach twist. Several of them matched dates when money had suddenly disappeared from their joint savings. But the accounts weren't in his name nor Clara's, at least not the Clara he knew. They were tied to that other identity, the name on the second ID he had found weeks before. Ethan's hands shook as he flipped through the pages. The sums weren't small. Tens of thousands had been moved, little by little, hidden in ways that made it seem intentional. His chest burned with anger as realization sank in. Clara had been siphoning money behind his back, feeding accounts that belonged to the ghost of her other life. Later that evening, he tested the waters. "Hey," he said casually, "didn't we have more in savings last month? I thought we were keeping it for the new house project." He watched her carefully as he spoke. Clara's eyes flicked up, and for the briefest moment, panic flashed across her face before she masked it with a smile. "Oh, I paid off some bills. You know, things I didn't want to bother you with." Her answer came too fast, her tone just a little too sweet. Ethan nodded, but his heart pounded with fury. He wanted to scream, to throw the notebook in front of her and demand the truth. But instead, he swallowed his rage. He realized he couldn't confront her yet, not without understanding the full scope of what she was hiding. If she had gone so far as to create another identity, who knew how far her deceptions reached? The next few days, Ethan watched her closely. Clara became increasingly secretive, slipping away to take phone calls, deleting messages, spending hours outside under the pretense of running errands. Ethan checked their account one morning and discovered another withdrawal, this one larger than before, and timed perfectly with her sudden trip to see a friend. The evidence was undeniable. Clara wasn't just lying about her past. She was actively stealing from their present. One night, While she was asleep, Ethan logged into the bank account again. His pulse raced as he clicked through the statements, following the trail of transactions. Each withdrawal led to the same destination, an account tied to that other name. And then he saw something that chilled him to his core. The name Michael appeared as a joint holder on one of those accounts. The same Michael Clara's old acquaintance had casually mentioned over lunch. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the blood draining from his face. Clara wasn't just hiding money. She was funneling it to someone else. Someone from her hidden past. Someone she still hadn't let go of. The betrayal cut deeper than any lie she had ever told, leaving Ethan with the sickening realization that everything they had built together, their marriage, their finances, their trust, was nothing but facade carefully constructed to cover a darker truth that was finally beginning to surface. The cracks in Clara's lies widened during what should have been a joyful evening. Ethan had arranged a small family gathering at their home, his sister, his parents, and a few close cousins. He wanted to believe that a night filled with warmth and laughter might distract him from the gnawing suspicions that had taken root. Clara played the perfect hostess, smiling at everyone, moving gracefully between the kitchen and the living room, refilling glasses and passing around plates of food. For a while, even Ethan almost believed the act. Almost. The evening shifted when his sister, curious as always, struck up a conversation about childhood memories. "Clara, didn't you say you grew up by the coast?" she asked. "What was it like living so close to the beach?" Ethan froze. He remembered that story well. The summers Clara described, the smell of salt in the air, the endless ocean. But before Clara could answer, his mother chimed in, "Funny, I thought you mentioned once that you came from up north, somewhere with heavy winters." Clara's smile faltered. She glanced around the room, her fingers tightening around the wine glass she held. For the briefest moment, her eyes flicked to Ethan's, and he saw panic shimmer there. "Oh," she said quickly, laughing too loud. "I moved around a lot. You know how it is. Different towns, different memories. All blends together after a while." Her explanation fell flat, the laughter sounding more like a defense than amusement. But the damage was done. The family noticed her unease. His cousin raised a brow. His mother gave a questioning look, and Ethan's sister leaned back, her curiosity now sharper than before. Clara tried to steer the conversation elsewhere, talking about recipes and travel plans, but Ethan could feel the tension hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. As the night went on, Clara slipped further. Someone mentioned banking, complaining about fees and long lines, and Ethan's father joked about how everyone had at least one embarrassing financial story. Clara, flustered, muttered something under her breath about keeping accounts hidden. It was quiet, barely audible, but Ethan caught it. His heart clenched. He wasn't sure if anyone else noticed, but he did, and it confirmed what he already knew. Her secrets weren't just about her past. They were bleeding into their present. When the guests finally left and the house fell silent, Ethan confronted her gently, not with accusations, but with carefully chosen words. "You seem nervous tonight," he said, his voice low. "Why do your stories keep changing?" Clara's face hardened. The warm, graceful woman from earlier vanished, replaced by someone colder, sharper. "People remember things differently," she snapped. "Are you seriously keeping score of every little thing I've ever said?" Ethan stared at her, searching for even a flicker of the honesty he once believed in. But all he saw was a mask, one she was fighting desperately to keep from slipping. And in that moment, surrounded by the echoes of his family's laughter now turned into silence, Ethan knew the truth was inching closer to the surface. Whether Clara wanted it revealed or not, Ethan couldn't keep living in shadows anymore. Every unanswered question, every slip of Clara's tongue, every warning from Daniel piled up until weight became unbearable. He needed more than suspicion. He needed proof. For days, he played the part of the oblivious husband, nodding at Clara's excuses, smiling when she brushed him off. But behind her back, he became a man consumed by the search for truth. He started small, combing through their shared files and bank statements again, matching dates and amounts. Each time Clara claimed to be with a friend or working late, another withdrawal appeared. But this time, Ethan didn't just write down the numbers. He followed the trail. Late into the night, He scoured financial records, tracing transfers through layers of accounts until they led to a single destination tied to her other name. And there was again the name Michael. The discovery burned like fire in his chest. But Ethan pushed on. He hacked into her email, not proud of it, but desperate. The hidden account he had once glimpsed now revealed its secrets. Messages filled with veiled language about keeping things quiet and ensuring Ethan never finds out. Some emails were short and urgent, others longer, more personal, filled with words that suggested intimacy. Clara wasn't just connected to this man financially. She was still connected to him emotionally, determined to go deeper. Ethan turned to the folder he had hidden weeks ago after first discovering it in the closet. This time he studied every page with precision, searching for threads he might have missed. That's when he found a rental contract tied to another city, signed just a year before he met her. The co-signer's name? Michael. The same man from the bank records, the same shadow who seemed to linger in every corner of her hidden life. The final piece of proof came unexpectedly. Clara had stepped out one evening, claiming she was meeting Lisa for dinner. Ethan's gut told him to follow, and so he did, trailing her car from a careful distance. She didn't drive to the restaurant. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. Ethan parked far enough away to avoid being seen, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. He watched as Claire got out of her car, her phone pressed to her ear, scanning the lot nervously. A few minutes later, a man emerged from one of the rooms, tall, broad-shouldered, older than Ethan had expected. He matched the description Daniel had given, the ghost named Michael brought to life before his eyes. Ethan's chest felt like it was caving in as he snapped photos with his phone, hands trembling. There was no denying it anymore. The documents, the bank accounts, the secret emails, all of it had been leading to this moment. Clara hadn't just lied about her past. She was still living it, half in his world and half in another, with a man she had sworn to erase. When she finally returned home that night, Ethan waited in the darkness, the proof sitting on the table in front of him. Photographs, documents, and printed emails spread out like pieces of a puzzle she could no longer deny. The time for pretending was over. The truth wasn't just creeping out from the shadows anymore. It was standing right in front of them, undeniable and ready to shatter everything she had worked so hard to keep hidden. The confrontation Ethan had been building toward erupted like a storm he could no longer hold back. He sat in the living room, the table between them covering the evidence he had gathered, bank records, the second ID, the emails, and the photographs of Clara at the motel with Michael. When Clara walked in and saw it all laid out, the color drained from her face. Her grocery bag slipped from her hands, tumbling to the floor as she froze in the doorway. "Sit down," Ethan said, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Clara didn't move at first, her eyes darting to the papers, then to him, then back again. Finally, with slow, measured steps, she crossed the room and sat, her hands trembling in her lap. Ethan pushed the photo across the table. "Explain this." Clara's lips parted, but no words came out. Her face twisted between fear, guilt, and defiance. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered. "Not what it looks like?" Ethan's voice rose, cracking with the fury he had held inside for weeks. He slammed his hand against the table, making the papers jump. "You've been lying to me since the day we met. Who are you, Clara? Or should I call you Anna? Or whatever name you used before you decided to rewrite your life." Clara flinched at the sound of her old name. For a moment, her eyes softened, almost pleading, as if hoping the way of her lies could be erased with a single look. But Ethan wasn't that man anymore. The blind trust he had once given her was gone, replaced by a cold, determined anger. "You took money from me," Ethan continued, his voice steady now, each word heavy. He held up the notebook with the account numbers. "You funneled it into accounts tied to him. You lied about where you came from, who you were, what you wanted. And all this time, you thought I wouldn't find out." Clara tried to speak, her words stumbling over themselves. I had to do it, Ethan. You don't understand. I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" He cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Don't insult me. You weren't protecting me, Clara. You were protecting yourself. your secrets, your past, him. He jabbed a finger at Michael's name on the document. The mask Clara had worn for so long cracked completely then. Tears welled in her eyes, her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, Ethan saw the woman beneath the performance. Not the warm, smiling wife he thought he knew, but someone desperate, cornered, and terrified of losing control. "I thought I could leave it behind," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I thought if I built a new life, I could bury the old one. But Michael, he doesn't let go. He never did. And if you knew what I did back then, you'd never forgive me." The confession hung heavy in the room, the silence suffocating. Ethan stared at her, his mind racing, his heart pounding with a mix of rage and disbelief. Every word out of her mouth only deepened the betrayal. She had stolen years from him, years built on lies. "Maybe you're right," Ethan said finally, his voice low and cold. "Maybe I'll never forgive you, but I will make sure you face the truth you've been running from. And this time, Clara, you won't be able to hide." The fallout was swift, brutal, and unstoppable. Once Ethan had the proof in his hands, it was no longer a private war between him and Clara. It became a storm that swept through every part of her carefully constructed life. He didn't raise his voice again, didn't let emotion cloud his judgment. Instead, he acted with precision, the same way he had uncovered her secrets. The next morning, Clara awoke to find her lies unraveling in places she never expected. Ethan had taken the photographs, the documents, and the financial records straight to the authorities. Fraud, identity deception, financial misconduct. Everything she thought she had buried was suddenly pulled into the light. Her second life wasn't a whisper in the dark anymore. It was an official investigation with her name stamped across it. Her friends, the same ones she had charmed for years, turned their backs the moment the truth reached them. Lisa, who had defended her endlessly, called Ethan in tears, apologizing for doubting him. Family members who once praised Clara's perfect marriage and envied her life now treated her like a stranger. The very reputation she had spent years curating disintegrated overnight. Michael, the man who had loomed like a shadow in the background, didn't stand by her either. When confronted, he distanced himself immediately, leaving Clara alone to face the consequences. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. She had lied, cheated, and stolen to protect a bond that, in the end, wasn't even real. The final blow came in court. Ethan stood tall, presenting every shred of evidence he had uncovered. Clara, once poised and in control, looked small and broken as the judge read through the findings. She tried to spin the story, tried to paint herself as a victim of circumstance, but the truth was undeniable. The lies, the money, the betrayal, it was all there in black and white. When it was over, Clara lost everything. The marriage was dissolved, her finances drained, her reputation in ruins. Ethan walked out of that courthouse free, not just legally, but emotionally. He had carried the weight of betrayal for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe without suspicion. Now, with the truth revealed and justice served, he felt lighter. Outside the courthouse, as reporters buzzed and onlookers whispered, Ethan didn't linger. He didn't need to gloat or watch Clara stumble through the wreckage of her own making. His revenge wasn't in her suffering. It was in reclaiming his own life, his own peace, stripped of the lies that had once poisoned it. For the first time in months, maybe years, Ethan felt a calm certainty settle over him. Clara's hidden life was no longer his burden. The shocking truth had been revealed, and with it, he finally walked away, not as a man broken by betrayal, but as the man who conquered it.